For nearly 2 decades, the Duggar family has been one of the most recognized households in America. Their lives filled with laughter, routines, family traditions, new babies, weddings, and heartfelt moments became part of the nation's living room. Millions watched them grow, watched them change, and watched their story unfold year after year. But behind the bright smiles, behind the carefully captured moments, behind the famous long dining table with every seat filled, the family's journey holds quiet chapters few people talk about. Chapters of transitions, chapters of silence, chapters of growing older, chapters of children stepping into adulthood, chapters that often happen away from cameras, in private places, at quiet hours. Our story today is not about drama, not about rumors, not about headlines. It is a story about time, about change, about how a large family slowly moves into new seasons of life, just as every family eventually does. To understand the Duggar story, we must begin where everything started. Jim, Bob, and Michelle Duggar built their life around faith, family, and a desire to raise children with simple values: discipline, love, responsibility, and gratitude. Over the years, their home expanded with new faces, new voices, and new responsibilities. Their children grew up with strong routines, shared chores, and the comfort of knowing they were never alone. Viewers across America loved watching the Duggar household. The morning rush, the cooking, the celebrations, the musical performances, the birthday traditions, the tender moments between siblings, the big family announcements. There was something warm, something familiar, something deeply American about them. They reminded many viewers, especially older women, of families they once knew or wished they had known. But time, as always, keeps moving. Children grow. They leave home. They find their own purpose. They build their own families. They create new routines, sometimes similar, sometimes very different. The Duggar children began to take those steps one by one. Some stayed close to home. Some moved to new cities. Some started businesses. Some became parents. Some embraced quieter lives. Some found their path in faith. Some explored creative passions. And some simply chose privacy after spending their entire youth under bright lights. For older viewers watching from afar, this shift felt emotional, almost like watching children you've known for years move out into the world. And while many Duggar family updates continued to appear publicly, birth announcements, new milestones, holiday gatherings, something else began to appear between the lines. A kind of gentle quietness, a slowing of the pace, a soft pulling away from the spotlight, a natural transition into adulthood for many of the Duggar siblings. Some stopped posting regularly. Some appeared less often in family videos. Some chose to share only small glimpses of their lives. Some simply preferred living without the pressure of being seen. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't mysterious. It was simply life. But for people who had watched them grow for so many years, these quiet shifts felt significant. In today's story, we explore how the Duggar family moved from a busy, public, all-together lifestyle into a more peaceful, scattered, grown-up season of life, a season where the children carry their childhood memories into new homes, new states, new families, and new dreams. We explore how time changed the dynamics, marriage and motherhood reshaped priorities, distance created new rhythms, privacy became precious, and how each child learned to balance their past with their present. This is not a story of loss. It is a story of growth. Because the truth is, large families do not stay the same forever. They evolve. Children become adults. Adults become parents. Parents become grandparents. Homes become quieter. Tables slowly shrink in size. The laughter becomes softer, but deeper. And updates become fewer, not because of distance, but because life becomes full in different, quieter ways. In this documentary, we honor that journey. The journey from childhood to adulthood, from one home to many, from being seen by millions to being cherished by a few. This is the Duggar family, not as a television household, but as a real American family growing, aging, changing, and moving gently into new chapters. And to understand the present, we must travel through those chapters, one season at a time. As the Duggar children grew older, something beautiful and entirely natural began to happen. The home that had once been filled to the brim with movement, noise, footsteps, and conversation slowly began to experience gentle pauses. Not because anything was wrong, but because life was changing. Childhood cannot last forever, even in the largest of families. Responsibilities grow, dreams evolve, the world expands. And one by one, the Duggar children stepped into that world. The older daughters, who once led their younger siblings in chores, homeschooling routines, music practice, evening devotions, and kitchen duties, began forming lives of their own. Jana, the oldest daughter, embraced a quieter role, gardening, home projects, helping her younger siblings, and later choosing a life of independence that became an inspiration to many older women who admired her strength, patience, and gentle spirit. She reminded viewers of daughters and granddaughters they knew, responsible, reliable, steady, the kind of woman who carries peace wherever she goes. Jill, Jessa, Jinger, Joy, and many others followed their own paths, some becoming mothers, some moving to new states, some finding creative outlets, some writing books, some simply enjoying the privacy that comes after years of public attention. Each of them grew into adulthood with the same blend of curiosity and courage that viewers had seen in them since childhood. Yet adulthood came with choices that naturally led them away from the constant presence of cameras. Weddings brought joyful changes. New babies brought fresh routines. New homes created new rhythms. And marriage often meant merging two families, two traditions, two ways of life. These transitions weren't sudden. They didn't happen overnight, but slowly, gently, quietly. Holiday photos still appeared, but sometimes with fewer faces. Family gatherings still happened, but with new branches of the family tree forming their own traditions. Some siblings lived close by, others lived hours away, and distance naturally shapes how often families come together. It was the kind of change every large family experiences eventually. Michelle and Jim Bob shifted into new roles too, from daily hands-on parenting to the softer, quieter role of grandparents, guiding gently from a distance, loving faithfully, celebrating each child's unique journey. Viewers who had watched the family's early years now found comfort in these transitions. They reminded them of their own children who moved out, grew up, built families, created memories in new homes. The Duggar story began to reflect something universal, the way families naturally spread out over time. Yet, even as life expanded outward, something else happened. A gentle quietness settled over the family's public presence. Some children chose not to share their everyday routines anymore, preferring small personal moments over large public updates. Some stepped back from social media entirely, not out of conflict, but out of a desire for privacy, for rest, for a slower pace of life. Some siblings gave occasional glimpses, a birthday celebration, a newborn photo, a quiet morning in the kitchen, a family walk at sunset. Other siblings shared more regularly videos, devotionals, encouraging words, simple snapshots of their day. Every choice reflected one truth. Adulthood looks different for each child. And that is okay. Over time, viewers began noticing a pattern, not alarming, not negative, simply natural. Some Duggar children were less visible. Their absence in group photos caused questions, not because anything was wrong, but because viewers had grown accustomed to seeing everyone together. But life rarely stays the same forever. Siblings build separate paths. Schedules don't always align. Children grow into adulthood with new priorities. And for families with many children, these quiet shifts appear even more noticeable. Some daughters stepped into quieter seasons intentionally, focusing on their homes, their children, their relationships, their faith, their mental well-being. Others entered busy seasons, balancing work, marriage, motherhood, personal projects. And a few simply preferred living without constant attention. After so many years in the public eye, privacy felt like a gentle gift, one they chose to embrace fully. But one thing remained the same. The bond of the Duggar family, a bond built over decades of shared memories, still held strong, even if not always visible to the outside world. Birthdays still brought messages. Babies still brought visits. Holidays still brought laughter. Siblings still leaned on each other. Parents still prayed for each child by name. And grandchildren filled the family with new life. To outside viewers, the Duggar home felt quieter, no longer the bustling center of daily activity it once was. But inside the hearts of its members, it remained a place of history, love, and gentle belonging. The world saw fewer updates. But inside the family, the updates simply shifted from public moments to private conversations, from online posts to quiet kitchen tables, from cameras to personal connections. This is where the story begins to deepen, the part of the journey that many viewers, especially older women, relate to. The transition from a loud, busy home to a quieter, scattered one. The shift from raising children to watching them raise children of their own. The bittersweet mix of pride and nostalgia. The beauty and ache of time passing. In the next part of this documentary, we explore these quieter seasons, how they unfolded, why they happened, and what they reveal about the heart of a family that grew up in front of the world, and then quietly grew into new lives beyond it. As the years passed, the Duggar family transitioned from a single, bustling household to a constellation of many small homes, each one carrying memories of the past, but shaped by new routines, new priorities, and new rhythms of life. The shift wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was gentle like a tide, pulling slowly outward. Each child walked into adulthood with a unique personality, unique dreams, unique challenges. Some embraced motherhood with joy, their homes filling with the laughter of little ones, the same kind of laughter they once shared with their siblings. Some found joy in moving to quieter towns or different states, building homes that reflected their new identities and the families they were creating. Some found passion in ministry, some in creativity, some in travel, some in homemaking, and some in simply building a life outside of public attention. Every path was valid. Every path was personal. But with these new paths came something viewers gradually noticed: silence. Not the silence of conflict, but the silence of adulthood. Siblings who once spent every day together now saw each other a few times a month, then a few times a year, and eventually mostly during holidays or special occasions. This was natural. This was time doing what time always does. It spreads a family apart, not in love, but in space. But for viewers who had watched the Duggars for so long, these changes felt bigger. It felt like the family was stepping out of sight, and in many ways, they were not to hide, not to avoid, but to live. The children who once grew up on camera now desired something simpler, a quieter life, a more private life, a life where personal moments belonged only to them. For many of the daughters, especially, this shift was meaningful. They had spent their entire childhoods in the public eye, in episodes, interviews, behind-the-scenes clips, birthday specials, wedding episodes, and countless moments preserved forever. It is a special experience, but it is also a lot of weight to carry. As adults, some chose to set that weight down. Some chose to share only small glimpses: a cooking moment, a child's milestone, a walk in the garden, a quiet afternoon. Others stepped away from posting altogether, embracing the luxury of privacy. For older women watching across America, This shift was deeply relatable. They remembered their own children leaving home, the bedrooms that became too quiet, the dinner tables that slowly shrank in size, the holidays when not everyone could make it. The way life transitions can feel both beautiful and bittersweet. Many viewers found comfort in knowing that the Duggars were simply growing up, not falling apart. Growing up means new homes, new babies, new marriages, new responsibilities, new priorities, new distances, and new ways of staying connected. Even if those connections were no longer broadcast to the world, they still existed, just in quieter ways. Holiday gatherings still happened. Birth announcements still filled the family group chats. Prayers were still shared. Advice still exchanged. Love still present, just not always photographed. This quietness sometimes created questions, especially when certain daughters appeared less often. People wondered where they were, why they were missing from a picture, why they hadn't posted in a while. But the truth was simple. Privacy became a blessing they earned, a blessing they cherished, a blessing that allowed them to grow into themselves without constant commentary. And for those who had grown up in the spotlight, privacy was not just a preference, it was peace. In a world where every moment can be shared, the most precious moments are often the ones kept close. Some daughters were busy raising little ones. Some were adjusting to new states. Some were navigating adulthood quietly. Some were building strong marriages. Some were healing. Some were simply living life away from screens. To older viewers, this season of quiet felt like the natural settling of a family after many vibrant, noisy, beautiful years. As children move into adulthood, their stories become less about shared routines and more about individual journeys. And yet, one truth remained unchanged. The Duggar roots, faith, belonging, family, still held firm. Even if not seen, they were felt. Even if not shared, they existed. Even if quiet, they were steady. The family that once lived in one home now lived in many, each home carrying a piece of the past and shaping it into something new. In the next part of this documentary, we explore these quieter seasons more closely. How some siblings embrace new chapters with joy, how others step back with grace, how privacy, motherhood, and adulthood shaped their choices, and how time created a gentle, natural distance that is part of every family's story. Because the Duggar story is not only about where they were, but about where they are now, and the beautiful, quiet ways they continue to grow. As the years passed and the Duggar home grew quieter, one thing became clear to longtime viewers. The daughters had entered a new season of life, a season defined not by visibility, but by quiet transformation. These young women, once surrounded by siblings, routines, cameras, and a constant flow of daily responsibilities, gradually stepped into private lives shaped by new roles. Wives, mothers, homemakers, career builders, ministry supporters, writers, and simply independent women choosing peace. For many of them, childhood had been full of structure, morning routines, school lessons, shared chores, cooking for 20, devotionals, music practice, quiet evenings. And these memories shaped them deeply. But adulthood brought choices. Choices that did not always include sharing their lives with millions. Some daughters embraced social media sparingly, posting simple joys. A family meal, a new baby blanket, a blooming flower in their garden, a walk with their husbands, a child's birthday. Others stepped back entirely, choosing lives that were full, but not public. To many older women watching from across America, this felt familiar, almost like watching their own daughters build their own homes, their own lives, their own rhythm. What viewers once saw every day now only appeared in small, precious glimpses. And this wasn't a loss. It was growth. For some daughters, motherhood became their quiet calling. Their days filled with soft morning light, small footsteps running down hallways, little hands tugging at aprons, Simple meals cooked with purpose, bedtime stories, whispered prayers, the joy and exhaustion that come from raising children. These chapters were tender, personal, and private. Moments they didn't feel a need to record publicly. Motherhood has a way of slowing a person down, teaching patience, gentleness, and presence. Many older viewers understood this immediately. They remembered their own motherhood years, how quickly they passed, how precious each moment was, how important privacy felt during those seasons. Other daughters embraced new states and new surroundings. Moves to Arkansas cities, moves out of state, moves to quieter neighborhoods. Distance naturally brought less visibility, fewer family photos, fewer group gatherings, fewer overlapping routines. This didn't mean separation. It meant independence. Large families often spread out like branches, each one growing in a different direction, but all connected to the same roots. Some daughters embraced creativity and personal growth. Journals, home projects, writing books, learning new skills, sharing encouragement online, or simply finding their voice outside the expectations of childhood. Their journeys were quieter, but filled with depth and meaning. And a few daughters chose gentle privacy, not because something was wrong, not because of conflict, but because life felt softer that way. Childhood spent in the public eye often leads adults to protect their personal world fiercely. Privacy becomes a refuge, a blessing, a quiet space to grow without commentary. For daughters who felt the weight of being watched for so many years, adulthood offered a different kind of gift, the gift of living without being seen. This shift, which viewers sometimes misunderstood as disappearance, was actually a sign of strength, a sign of knowing what they needed and choosing what brought them peace. Celebrations continued, but in smaller circles. Birthdays, baby showers, anniversary dinners, little gatherings, sisters' meetings, walks with moms, family traditions passed down quietly. They still happened, just not always on camera. Older viewers watching from afar felt the nostalgia, the memory of their own children leaving the nest, the gentle ache of homes that became quieter over time. The Duggar daughters' journey reminded them of daughters finding their own homes, daughters building their own families, daughters learning to balance past with present, daughters stepping into themselves. It was a universal story. The beauty of the Duggar daughters' quietness is this: they did not fade away. They simply grew up. They did not disappear. They matured. They did not walk away. They walked forward. Their lives became private, personal, intentional. And while the world saw less of them, their families saw more. More conversations, more moments, more memories, more connection in kitchens, living rooms, and porches away from the public eye. The Duggar home may have grown quieter, but the love remained steady and strong. In the next part of this documentary, we explore what this quiet season teaches us about family, change, and the beautiful complexity of growing up in the public eye and then choosing a gentler life beyond it. As the Duggar daughters settled into their own homes, something equally gentle began happening at the heart of the family. A new generation was growing. Children were being born, milestones were being celebrated, and the once tiny toddlers who ran through the Duggar hallways were now raising toddlers of their own. The cycle of family life, so familiar to older viewers, continued in soft, beautiful waves. Jim, Bob, and Michelle, the pillars of the home for so many years, shifted into a new season themselves, a season of being grandparents. And this transition, quiet though it was, brought with it a tender transformation. Grandparenthood is a different kind of love, not the busy, every-minute responsibility of raising children, but the gentle, patient presence of guiding, watching, encouraging, and loving without rush. For the Duggar parents, this meant visiting when they could, supporting when asked, enjoying every new baby, offering wisdom gently, learning to step back and let their children lead. And for many older women watching, this felt deeply familiar. They knew what it meant to shift from parenting children to watching them become parents themselves. They knew the sweetness of holding a grandchild for the first time, a moment when time slows and the heart expands in ways words can't capture. They knew the quiet pride of seeing a daughter teach her own children the same values she once learned at home. They knew the bittersweet peace of letting the next generation take the lead. This gentle passing of seasons became one of the most beautiful chapters in the evolving Duggar story. As daughters became mothers, their worlds grew fuller. Morning routines changed. Nap schedules shaped daily life. Little ones filled their homes with joy, noise, and wonder. Motherhood often brings a different kind of silence, not emptiness, but fullness. A day so full of caregiving, cooking, cleaning, teaching, playing on the floor, comforting small tears, celebrating small victories, that there is simply no time to post updates, to take pictures, to share every moment. And that's okay. For many Duggar daughters, social media became a smaller part of their world as their homes became larger parts of their hearts. A quiet morning with a newborn became more important than an online update. A bedtime prayer with a toddler mattered more than a family photo. A peaceful evening with their husbands meant more than sharing daily details with the world. To older viewers, mothers, grandmothers, great-grandmothers, this made perfect sense. They remembered their own long days with babies, their quiet afternoons folding laundry, their evenings cooking dinner for growing children. Their hopes there, exhaustion their deep, private joys they knew motherhood demands presence, not performance. They knew privacy is not hiding, but honoring. They knew the real stories of family life are often the ones that never get posted. As the daughters stepped deeper into adulthood, distance grew naturally. Some daughters lived closer to the family home, others farther away. Schedules rarely aligned perfectly. Holidays became the main time for large, joyful gatherings. This was not a sign of separation. It was simply life. Even siblings who adore each other do not see each other daily once adulthood begins. A family once under one roof becomes a family stretched across towns, cities, and states. This shift is natural, healthy, and universal. And it was happening to the Duggar children just as it happens to every large family. A new, quieter kind of connection took shape. Group text messages, shared baby photos, simple, "How are you today?" Notes, church visits, holiday gatherings, occasional sister hangouts, moments spent with grandparents, helping each other when needed, staying connected in small but meaningful ways. The world didn't always see these moments, but the family did. And in a way, that was the point. Not everything needed to be shared anymore. Not everything needed to be photographed. Not everything needed to be public. The love was still there, just quieter, just softer, just deeper. The Duggar story entered a peaceful season. Not dramatic, not mysterious, simply peaceful. A season where children became adults, adults became parents, parents became grandparents. Life slowed down. Priorities shifted inward. Privacy became precious. The outside world saw less. The family felt more. For older viewers, this season resonated deeply. They had lived through their own evolving families. The quiet dinners after children moved out. The phone calls instead of daily conversations. The joy of new grandchildren. The ache of missing old times. And the acceptance that time always moved forward with both beauty and tenderness. The Duggar family was reflecting the same gentle, universal truth. In the next part of this documentary, we explore how the family's quieter presence shaped public perception, and what these silent chapters really mean, because silence doesn't always signal distance. Sometimes it signals growth. As time moved forward, the Duggar family entered a chapter that very few people expected, a chapter not marked by television episodes, not marked by weekly photos, not marked by constant updates, but a chapter defined by something gentler, something quieter, something deeply human. life unfolding in private. For so many years, viewers felt connected to a family that shared both ordinary and extraordinary moments with the world. We watched the children grow, watched the daughters become young women, watched engagements, weddings, and the joyful chaos of a home filled with more personalities than most people meet in a lifetime. But eventually, the spotlight softened. The cameras turned off. The voices grew quieter. And a different kind of story began. Not a story of endings, but a story of transformation. A large family rarely stays in one place forever. Children grow. They marry. They move. They build their own routines. They discover new identities. They create new homes. A family that once shared every meal around one table now shares updates through phone calls, messages, occasional visits, holidays, simple moments, instead of staged ones. This is not distance. This is maturity. It is the natural rhythm of life, the rhythm older viewers know all too well. The Duggar daughters, who once helped raise younger siblings, now raise children of their own. They teach them bedtime songs, cook meals in their own kitchens, create new memories that belong only to their families. Some daughters stay close to home. Some explore new places. Some share glimpses of their lives. Others keep their memories private. Every choice is their own, and every choice is valid. The quietness that viewers sometimes notice is not a sign of trouble. It is a sign of growth. It is a sign that the children who grew up in front of the world are now choosing a softer life. A life where every moment does not need to be shared. A life where motherhood or independence defines their days. A life where privacy becomes a blessing, not a burden. For many older women watching, this resonates deeply. They understand that silence often means someone is busy with life, busy loving, busy caring for little ones, busy working on their home, busy building something meaningful behind closed doors. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence in the places that matter most. Asterisk, asterisk, in this quiet season, something beautiful has happened. The family hasn't grown apart. It has grown outward. Asterisk, asterisk, into new homes, new communities, new callings, new generations. And each new branch carries a piece of the old tree, the values, the memories, the traditions that began in that busy Arkansas's home. The laughter may be softer now, but it still exists. The meals may be eaten in different houses, but the recipes live on. The siblings may not share daily routines, but the bonds remain, woven by childhood memories and strengthened by adulthood understanding. Asterisk, asterisk. For the parents, Jim, Bob, and Michelle, this season brings a quieter kind of joy. Asterisk, asterisk. They watch their grandchildren grow. They celebrate milestones at a gentler pace. They support their children from the background. They step forward when invited and step back when needed. It is the natural shift every parent faces. Learning to let go, learning to trust, learning to love from a distance while staying emotionally close. Asterisk, asterisk. The world may miss seeing the Duggars every day, but the family is still moving, still growing, still living. Asterisk, asterisk. Just not publicly. The daughters who once lived in the spotlight are now choosing soft, private lives, and that choice is not a mystery. It is maturity. It is peace. It is a new chapter written with intention. And behind this quietness is something older viewers understand deeply. You don't stop loving your family just because you see them less. You simply learn to love them differently. Asterisk, asterisk. And so, the Duggar story enters a new era, not one of television, but one of life. Asterisk, asterisk, one of gentle updates, long-awaited visits, children growing older, quiet dinners, soft moments, little celebrations, private joys, heartfelt conversations. The Duggar family remains a family, not in the bright lights of cameras, but in living rooms, text messages, birthday parties, weddings, Sunday afternoons. They remain connected through memories, faith, tradition, and the irreplaceable bond of growing up together in one extraordinary home. Asterisk, asterisk, this is not the end of their story. It is simply the beginning of a quieter one. Asterisk, asterisk, a story written in slow mornings, in children's laughter, in whispered prayers, in peaceful privacy, in hearts that still carry decades of shared history. A story that no longer belongs to the world, but belongs to them. And perhaps there is nothing more beautiful than a family choosing to grow in the soft, unseen places where love can breathe freely. This is not the end of their story. It is simply the beginning of a quieter one. And as this quieter season settled over the Duggar family, something else began to unfold. Something gentle, something slow, something deeply human. It was the transformation of the Duggar daughters into women with lives far beyond the home where they had once grown up together. For many years, the world saw them as teenagers with practiced smiles, living in a house full of constant noise, constant movement, and constant attention. But adulthood rarely looks like childhood. And for the Duggar daughters, adulthood blossomed in ways more private, more thoughtful, and more meaningful than anyone expected. The home they grew up in was always filled with activity. Mornings that began before sunrise, chores divided among many hands, lessons taught at the dining table, laughter echoing through hallways, rows of little shoes by the front door, young girls with long hair learning to braid their younger sisters' curls. Those images became part of America's living room for years. Viewers watched them grow, not as characters, but almost like distant children of their own. But time has a gentle way of reshaping everything. And one by one, the Duggar daughters stepped out of the familiar patterns of their youth and into the wide, unpredictable landscape of adulthood. When they were young, their days were structured for them. Their responsibilities were defined. Their routines were predictable. Adulthood changed all of that. Suddenly, they had choices, real choices. Choices about where to live, whom to marry, how to raise children, how much privacy to keep, what boundaries to set, and how to shape their own lives beyond the expectations built around them. Jana, the eldest daughter, carried a presence of calm that viewers always admired. There was something timeless about her. A gentle steadiness, a softness that reminded older women of daughters and granddaughters who never craved spotlight, but found joy in quiet moments. She became the caretaker, not because she had to, but because that is who she naturally was, someone who nurtured through stillness. As she entered adulthood, her life didn't become louder. It became quieter. She leaned into gardening, creating peaceful corners, completing home projects, and offering help where needed. Her world slowed, but it didn't shrink. It simply settled into a rhythm that made sense to her. Her public updates became rare, yet her presence never felt absent. She became a symbol of the kind of woman whose beauty lies not in being seen, but in being steady. Jill stepped into a life of deep emotional growth. She had always been thoughtful, reflective, someone who saw the world not only as it was, but as it could be. As she became a mother and built her own home, she learned to navigate boundaries, relationships, and independence in ways that older viewers found relatable. Her story wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It was real. It was the story of a woman learning to nurture herself while nurturing her children. Her updates were heartfelt, sometimes brave, sometimes quiet, always honest. She didn't post often, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had chosen what mattered most, her peace. Jess's life grew fuller by the year. Motherhood fit her in a way that felt natural, warm, and familiar. Her home became a place filled with the busy chaos of childhood tiny hands pulling at her dress, toys scattered across the living room, meals shared at a table sticky with fingerprints. Many older women saw their younger selves reflected in her days overflowing with little responsibilities that somehow shaped the biggest memories. Her posts became glimpses into a life centered not on performance, but on presence. She wasn't trying to show something. She was living something. Jinger entered a chapter of exploration, moving to new places, experiencing different cultures, growing in her own understanding of the world. She represented change, not the kind born out of rebellion, but the kind born out of curiosity. Her life became a blend of creativity, travel, quiet reflections, and discovering who she was beyond the expectations of her upbringing. She didn't post often, but when she did, older viewers saw a young woman carving out a thoughtful path one step at a time. Joy Anna built a life centered around simplicity. Her world became one of quiet drives, outdoor afternoons, children playing in the yard, and small celebrations that filled her home with warmth. She embraced the kind of contentment that comes from living close to the land, close to family, close to the heart of everyday life. Her updates reflected soft moments, little hands holding hers, afternoon sunlight on a kitchen floor, the tender exhaustion of raising toddlers. As each Duggar daughter stepped deeper into adulthood, something else began to happen, a gentle silence. A silence that the world noticed long before they understood it. The daughters who were once so visible were now seen less. Not absent, not gone, just quieter. Their silence wasn't a mystery. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't an ending. It was simply adulthood. Motherhood takes time. Marriage takes time. Moving takes time. Healing takes time. Building your own life takes time. And none of these things fit easily into daily posts or constant updates. Their silence was the silence of full lives lived behind front doors rather than through screens. Some viewers worried. Others wondered. But older women understood immediately. They had seen their own daughters grow quieter as they built families. They remembered the years when they barely had a moment to themselves. They remembered choosing privacy over public space. They recognized the beauty of a face that belongs entirely to the heart. The daughters did not fade from the family. They simply faded from public view. They were still sisters, still mothers, still daughters, still connected through text messages, holiday gatherings, shared photos, and quiet afternoons spent together. But their lives no longer required the world's attention. They were living for themselves. Their quietness held stories, stories of rocking newborns at 3 a.m, stories of teaching toddlers how to pray, stories of laughing over dinner with husbands, stories of small joys, small struggles, small victories, stories that didn't need to be posted, stories that were sacred. The Duggar daughters weren't disappearing. They were becoming, transforming, growing, maturing into women whose lives were shaped not by childhood routines, but by adult choices that honored their own pace, their own peace, their own boundaries. Their silence was not an absence. It was a presence in the places that mattered most. And as the daughters stepped into quieter lives, the Duggar story entered a new era, an era not seen on screens, but felt in kitchens, in children's laughter, in the warmth of homes spread across different cities and states. This was a new chapter, one that didn't ask to be watched, but deserved to be respected. A chapter of women living their own lives, guided by the values they grew up with and the wisdom they learned along the way. And so, the silence the world noticed was simply the sound of adulthood. While the Duggar daughters entered their new quiet seasons, the Duggar sons were moving into their own lives, as well, lives that unfolded even more silently, even more gently, and often far away from the public eye. Unlike their sisters, the sons had never been as individually visible during childhood. Many viewers remembered them as the boys in the background running across the yard, helping with chores, playing music, assisting with small construction projects around the house. Their personalities were known in glimpses, not in detail. And so, when adulthood came, their journeys felt even quieter, even more understated, even more naturally private. As the years passed, the Duggar sons stepped into responsibilities that shaped their days in steady, practical ways. They pursued careers, learned trades, built small businesses, and created homes that reflected the values they grew up with. Their lives were rarely posted online, rarely discussed, rarely explained, not because they were hiding, but because the rhythm of their adulthood simply didn't require a public stage. Some of the sons embraced careers in fields like construction, real estate, property renovation, or aviation. Their days became structured by schedules, deadlines, and hands-on work that left little time or desire for social media updates. In many ways, they embodied the quiet, hard-working American man, focused, steady, and deeply involved in building something tangible. Their fulfillment came not from being seen, but from providing, creating, and contributing to their own families. For older viewers, their journey was familiar. Many women who watched the Duggar family had sons or grandsons who lived the same way men who didn't. T-post online who shared their lives only in small conversations, who stayed busy with work, who showed their love, not through words, but through actions. The Duggar sons fit into that same pattern, living in a world where privacy wasn't a choice, but a natural part of maturity. As the sons married, new homes were formed, new babies were born, new responsibilities entered their lives. Many of the Duggar sons became fathers quietly, gently, and without much public attention. Their children appeared occasionally in family photos, but most moments remained private bedtime stories, backyard games, moments in the garage, trips to church, long evenings at home. Their wives also stepped into motherhood, embracing the quiet, tender routines of raising children. Together, they built homes shaped by faith, love, and simplicity. The noise of childhood, once so familiar in the Duggar home, now echoed in many different houses, spread across different neighborhoods and cities. Some sons lived close to the original family home, maintaining regular contact and shared traditions. They visited often, sometimes for special meals, sometimes to help with projects, sometimes simply to reconnect. Others moved farther away, creating small pockets of Duggar family life in distant places. But no matter the distance, the bond remained steady. Holidays brought everyone together when possible, and when not, the connection stayed alive through messages, calls, and personal visits. What made the sons' journey especially quiet was their nature. Many of them were reserved, private, and content with small, steady routines. They didn't seek attention or recognition. Their lives revolved around their families, their jobs, their faith, and their responsibilities. The quietness wasn't unusual. It was who they had always been. As they moved into adulthood, the roles they played in the family shifted as well. They were no longer the boys helping with chores or playing in the yard. They became the men who assisted with home repairs, helped siblings move, lent support during difficult times, and stepped into roles that mirrored the father figures they had admired growing up. Their quiet presence created a sense of balance in the family, strong yet humble, steady yet gentle. They weren't at the center of the spotlight, but they were part of the foundation that held the family together in small, important ways. In this new era, the Duggar sons continued to grow into identities that remained mostly unseen by the world. While the daughter's silence was often noticed and questioned, the son's silence felt natural, almost expected. Many older viewers understood this deeply. They knew that men often expressed their love quietly, through consistency rather than conversation, through actions rather than attention. And so, the sons carried forward the values they grew up with: discipline, responsibility, commitment, and faith. Their paths were simple, but meaningful. Their updates were rare, but sincere. Their lives were full, but private. As the Duggar family expanded through marriages and children, the sons' homes became part of the larger Duggar legacy, small branches growing from the same tree, each developing its own character, its own traditions, its own rhythm. Some households were lively and energetic, others calm and steady, but all were rooted in a shared beginning. The sons' quiet lives also shaped the way the extended family interacted. Gatherings became more precious, holidays more meaningful. With so many children grown and living scattered across different places, it became harder to have everyone together at once. Yet, when it happened, the moments were filled with warmth. Cousins playing together, siblings catching up, parents watching the next generation grow. Even when everyone could not gather physically, the connection remained. Group chats, photos of new babies, birthday messages, prayer requests, and updates, shared through siblings, kept the family woven together. The sons contributed to these connections in their own quiet ways, through short messages, shared photos, or simply showing up when it mattered most. The Duggar sons were never the loudest part of the family story, and they didn't become the loudest in adulthood either. But their presence remained meaningful, steady, and vital. They were the quiet anchorsmen whose lives reflected responsibility, faithfulness, and a commitment to building strong families. Their stories did not need to be told loudly. They were not stories of drama or attention. They were stories of quiet transformation, stories of work, stories of fatherhood, stories of steady growth, stories of ordinary, everyday life, the kind of life that many older viewers recognized as the very foundation of what family means. And as the sons continued growing, the Duggar family entered a new season 1, defined not by visibility, but by depth, not by being seen, but by being connected, not by attention, but by authenticity. The family was no longer a single household under one roof. It had become many households connected by love, history, and the gentle strength of children who grew up and built worlds of their own. And in this quiet expansion, the sons played a role that was steady, humble, and deeply rooted in the values they carried from their childhood home. Their silence was not a mystery. It was maturity. It was responsibility. It was life unfolding in its most natural form. As the Duggar daughters and sons quietly stepped into new roles, responsibilities, and different chapters of their adult lives, another transformation was unfolding, one that was soft, gentle, and deeply emotional. It was the transformation of Michelle Duggar, the mother who once filled every corner of her home with warmth, guidance, and quiet. Discipline now stepping into a season she had never fully imagined, the season of becoming a grandmother many times over. For years, viewers knew Michelle as the mother whose voice seemed to float gently above the noise of a house full of children. Her calm tone, her steady presence, her soft approach to correction, these became hallmarks of her motherhood. She was always seen with little ones around her, helping with schoolwork, teaching life lessons, guiding chores, praying with children, and preparing meals with a patience that seemed endless. She was the center of the home, the heart that kept everything moving in rhythm. But as time passed, the rhythm changed. The home that once echoed with the sounds of toddlers running across wooden floors, squeals from backyard playtime, and the daily hum of dozens of voices suddenly grew quieter. The bedrooms that were once always full began to empty. Children became teenagers, and teenagers became adults. Weddings filled the calendar, and one by one, her children moved out to build families of their own. And in the middle of this slow transformation stood Michelle, entering a phase of life very different from the one she had known for decades. Motherhood had demanded constant energy, early mornings, late nights, endless laundry, meal planning, teaching, comforting, managing, guiding. It was a season of complete involvement, where every moment was filled with responsibility. But grandmotherhood was different. It was slower, softer, more reflective, more emotional than she expected. Instead of guiding every hour of the day, she now watched from a gentle distance. Instead of organizing routines, she now admired the routines her daughters created. Instead of teaching children directly, she now witnessed her children teaching their own little ones. The shift from mother to grandmother was not a loss. It was a passage, one filled with memories, gratitude, and a tenderness only time can create. There were mornings when Michelle would walk through the quiet hallway of her home and pause, remembering the sound of 20 different footsteps rushing toward the kitchen for breakfast. She could almost hear the laughter, the arguments, the questions, the chaos of children needing her every moment. And though those days were beautiful, she knew they belonged to the past. The present held a different beauty, a beauty built on watching her children build homes of their own. Some days she would sit with a cup of tea in her hands, looking at framed photos on the wall, pictures of children at different ages, family portraits, wedding days, newborns wrapped in blankets. Each photo held a story. Each story held a season. And each season had passed before she even realized how quickly time moved. For older women watching, Michelle's journey felt deeply familiar. They knew the bittersweet feeling of a house that grew quieter over the years. They recognized the tenderness of seeing their children become parents. They understood the quiet ache of missing the noise, even while appreciating the peace. They knew the feeling of wanting to guide while learning to step back. Michelle's transition mirrored their own, reminding them of how motherhood changes, but never ends. As grandchildren were born, and they came often, Michelle stepped into her new role with the same warmth that defined her motherhood, but in a gentler way. She became the grandmother who held babies with a soft smile, who encouraged her daughters during the exhausting early days of motherhood, who prayed for her grandchildren, who supported her daughters-in-law with kindness, and who offered guidance only when asked. Her home, once the center of everything, now became a place of reunion rather than daily activity. Holidays brought the family together, sons with their families, daughters with their little ones, grandchildren running around the same hallways where her children had once played. For a moment, the noise returned, the laughter returned, the energy returned. And Michelle soaked it in, knowing how precious these gatherings were. But when the holiday ended and everyone returned to their own homes, the house returned to its quiet state. There were evenings when she would sit in the living room with just the soft ticking of a clock in the background. She would reflect on the early years of motherhood, the challenges, the growth, the blessings. And she would think about how her daughters now carried those same burdens and joys. Michelle often found herself watching her daughters mother their own children with a sense of pride. They cooked meals, planned activities, taught lessons, and guided their families with strengths they had developed over years of observation. She could see pieces of herself reflected in their choices, the calmness, the patience, the structure, the warmth. But she also saw how they added their own touch, their own personality, their own approach. It was a reminder that motherhood evolves with each generation. There were moments when her daughters called her late at night for advice, overwhelmed by the challenges of raising little ones. Michelle would listen patiently, offer encouragement, and remind them that motherhood is not about perfection, it's about presence. She reassured them in the same tone she once used for them as children. And when her daughters took her advice, she felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her impact continued in gentle, unseen ways. As a grandmother, Michelle also played a unique role. She was no longer responsible for daily discipline. She was no longer the one organizing school schedules or meal plans. Instead, she became the source of comfort, the person who held grandchildren during naps, who brought small gifts, who read stories, who prayed quietly over their lives. She was someone her grandchildren felt safe with, someone who carried decades of experience wrapped in a warm smile. Her relationship with her daughters-in-law deepened as well. She understood that each young mother carried her own fears, her own hopes, her own dreams. Michelle offered support without pressure, love without expectation, presence without intrusion. She knew that grandmotherhood required a different kind of wisdom, a wisdom built on stepping back when needed and stepping forward when invited. The quietness of her home allowed Michelle to reflect on faith, purpose, and legacy. Her days were less structured now, allowing her time to walk outside, to read, to pray, to appreciate the slow unfolding of life in a way she never had time for before. Adulthood had brought her children independence, but it brought her something equally valuable: reflection. And as she watched her grandchildren grow, she understood that the future of the Duggar family was no longer in her hands. It was in theirs. It was in the small hands learning to crawl. It was in the toddlers learning to speak. It was in the little hearts learning kindness from their parents. Michelle had planted seeds for many years. Now she watched them bloom in homes scattered across different places, each carrying a little piece of the foundation she had helped build. In the quiet moments of her new life, Michelle realized something profound. Motherhood does not end when children leave. It simply changes form. It becomes quieter but deeper, less visible but more meaningful. It becomes a presence rather than a direction, a warmth rather than a structure, a prayer rather than a plan. Michelle's story became a reflection of many older women who watched the Duggar documentary, women who had raised children, watched them leave, missed the noise, and found peace in the next chapter. Her journey reminded them that a mother's role never disappears. It simply softens. It simply evolves. Michelle Duggar, once the heart of a bustling home, now became the heart of a growing family spread across many homes connected through love, memory, and the quiet strength of a woman who embraced every season with grace. As Michelle entered her quiet season of grandmotherhood, Jim Bob Duggar, too, found himself living in a chapter very different from the one he had known for most of his life. For decades, he had been the father of one of the busiest, liveliest homes in America. The house was never still, never silent. There was always someone calling his name, always a project that needed his hands, always a child to guide, always a routine to maintain. His days were structured around making sure everyone was safe, everyone was cared for, and everyone had what they needed. At time changes even the strongest rhythms. Slowly, the noise faded. One by one, his children grew up, found partners, built homes, and moved into lives shaped by their own decisions. The dining table that once seated a small army now had empty chairs. The hallways that once carried the sound of footsteps and laughter now echoed with a quiet that felt both gentle and unfamiliar. And Jim Bob, a man once surrounded by constant motion, stepped into the stillness with a mix of reflection, gratitude, and humility. There were mornings when he would walk into the kitchen and be surprised by how quiet it was. He would pause for a moment, remembering the days when breakfast felt like managing a small restaurant, plates being passed, conversations overlapping, the sounds of 20 different personalities filling the room. Now the mornings were peaceful. The quiet didn't feel lonely, but it did feel different. It was the kind of quiet that made him think, reflect, remember. He would sit at the head of the long table and look down its length, seeing memories instead of empty chairs. He remembered teaching the boys how to fix things, encouraging the girls in their responsibilities, offering guidance, praying over meals, and watching his children grow day by day. Those moments lived in his heart now, and sometimes he found himself missing the exhaustion of those early years, the beautiful, heavy kind of tiredness that comes from raising a large family. Jim Bob's children had always looked to him for direction, for stability, for strength. And now, in their adulthood, he had learned to step back, to watch them take the lead, to understand that fatherhood evolves just as motherhood does. He was no longer the center of every decision, no longer the one who provided the answers. Instead, he became the support, still strong, still present, but quieter, gentler, softer in his influence. Some evenings, he would walk outside and stand on the porch, the cool air brushing against his face, and watch the sun sink behind the trees. It was during those moments that he felt the passing of time most deeply. He would think about each child, where they lived now, how they were doing, how they were raising their own children. He would pray for them silently, knowing that even when they didn't need his advice, they always needed his love. As grandchildren filled the family tree, Jim Bob's role shifted once again. He became the grandfather who brought small gifts, who played on the floor with little ones, who cheered them on during early steps and first words. He was no longer the man organizing big family projects. He was the man sitting in the living room with a toddler in his lap, reading picture books and feeling a joy he had not expected in this season of life. The grandchildren saw him differently from how his own children once did. To them, he wasn't the man overseeing a busy household. He was the man who smiled when they entered the room, who laughed softly as they told him stories, who hugged them gently, who listened with patience. In their eyes, he was a comforting presence, a safe lap, a warm voice, someone they associated with love, not responsibility. Jim Bob's relationship with his adult children also changed. Conversations became deeper, more reflective. His sons sought him out not just for guidance, but for companionship, wanting to share moments, ideas, and challenges. His daughters reached out not because they needed direction, but because they valued his presence, his steady voice, his quiet wisdom. There were days when he would drive to visit one of his children, carrying tools or supplies to help with a project. Other days, he would simply go to spend time with grandchildren. Sometimes he would sit on a living room couch, watching his children parent their own little ones, feeling both proud and humbled. He realized that the lessons he and Michelle had taught had taken root. Their children were building homes full of love, care, and faith, homes shaped by echoes of their upbringing, but filled with their own unique traditions. Watching his adult children build their lives taught Jim Bob an unexpected truth. Fatherhood does not shrink with age, it expands. It becomes less about giving orders and more about listening, less about directing and more about supporting, less about being needed and more about being valued. He learned that love, in this new chapter, was no longer loud. It was quiet. It was deep. It was steady. There were evenings when he and Michelle would sit together on the porch, talking softly about the past, the challenges, the laughter, the moments that had defined their early years of parenting. They would talk about how they used to stay awake at night, worried about whether they were doing enough, giving enough, teaching enough. Now they found peace in knowing that their children had grown into adults with strong values, strong love, and strong lives. Sometimes Jim Bob would feel the ache of missing the days when all of his children were under one roof. The birthdays filled with noise, the holidays that felt like managing a small town, the evenings of family prayers, the daily routines that once seemed overwhelming. But as he watched his grown children raise their own families, he understood that those memories were not lost. They had simply transformed into a new purpose. The future of the Duggar family was no longer something he had to build. It was something he could now witness. And that realization brought him a quiet sense of fulfillment. He didn't need to be the center anymore. He could be the foundation, steady, supportive, always present even when invisible. He found new joy in moments that once felt small. Sitting quietly with Michelle in the evening, receiving a photo of a new grandchild, getting a text from a son asking for advice, watching his daughters step into motherhood, holding a newborn grandchild and feeling the weight of generations in his arms. Jim Bob's life, once defined by constant movement, now became defined by reflection. He thought about the journey that had brought him here, the sacrifices, the hopes, the mistakes, the blessings, and he realized that every season of life had prepared him for the next. He grew into a man who understood that silence did not mean disappearance. That distance did not mean separation. That changes did not mean loss. His family was growing not away from him, but outward from him. His influence lived on in the homes his children built, in the grandchildren who carried his features, in the prayers he whispered for each generation. And as he stepped into his later years, Jim Bob embraced a new kind of purpose. Not the purpose of building a family, but the purpose of cherishing one. Not the purpose of shaping lives, but the purpose of witnessing them unfold. Not the purpose of leading, but the purpose of loving with a softer, deeper, quieter strength. His story became a reminder to all who watched. Fatherhood never ends. it simply grows gentler. It becomes a presence rather than a direction, a steady hand rather than a guiding one, a quiet love that speaks more powerfully with time. And in this quiet love, Jim Bob found his new chapter. As the Duggar children continued to build their own lives, each in separate homes, separate towns, and separate seasons of adulthood, the rhythm of the family began to take on a different shape. It was no longer the everyday closeness of a single household, filled with routines and shared responsibilities. Instead, closeness became something that unfolded during special moments, brief reunions, and gatherings that brought everyone back under the same sky, even if only for a little while. Holidays became the heartbeat of this new chapter. These moments, Thanksgiving meals, Christmas mornings, New Year gatherings, and birthday celebrations, became the times when the Duggar family felt whole again. Not because everyone could always be present, but because no matter who came, the sense of belonging was still there. There was a quiet beauty in watching this transition. Once, holidays were loud, predictable, full of activity. Every child was home. Every seat at the table was filled. Every room echoed with the sound of siblings playing, cooking, wrapping gifts, or decorating together. Now, the celebrations looked different. Some children arrived early, others came later. Some brought their own families, children, and even new traditions. There were years when one family couldn't make it, or when another stayed only for a few hours before traveling back home. But even in these smaller, shifting gatherings, something essential remained unchanged: the desire to be together. On Thanksgiving, the familiar aroma of roasted turkey, sweet potatoes, and homemade rolls filled the home. Michelle would begin preparing days in advance, often calling her daughters to ask about their plans, their travel times, and their special dishes. She no longer cooked for 20, but she still cooked with the same love. The kitchen, once crowded with children learning to stir, pour, and taste, now hosted grown daughters who arrived with dishes of their own each, representing homes they had created independently. Laughter drifted through the rooms as cousins played together, forming bonds that reminded older family members of the days when their own children had done the same. Christmas brought a different kind of warmth. The house glowed softly with lights and memories. The tree, once decorated entirely by little hands, now carried ornaments added by the next generation. Michelle and Jim Bob often sat quietly in the living room, watching their grandchildren open small gifts with wide-eyed excitement. The joy on those young faces stirred memories of earlier years, memories that returned like gentle waves, full of sweetness but softened by time. There were moments when Jim Bob would sit on the couch and simply take in the scene. Daughters chatting by the fireplace, sons helping their little ones assemble toys, grandchildren climbing onto laps, conversations weaving through the room like threads of a tapestry that had stretched across decades. And he would think to himself that this quiet, imperfect, ever-changing gathering was the reward of years spent building a large family. Easter gatherings were often smaller, more peaceful. Families arrived with pastel-colored baskets and children dressed in their Sunday best. A simple meal, an egg hunt in the yard, and soft conversations in the afternoon sun became the traditions that replaced the busyness of earlier years. There were moments of reflection, moments of gratitude, moments when the beauty of family felt almost fragile, something to be handled with care. Birthdays became journeys in themselves. With so many children and grandchildren, there was always a reason to celebrate. But as the family spread across different places, not every celebration could be attended in person. Sometimes there were video calls, where the sound of grandchildren singing "Happy Birthday" came through a phone speaker. Sometimes there were handwritten cards from daughters who now lived hours away. Sometimes the celebrations took place in smaller groups, with photos later shared in family message threads. And each time, even if the celebration was simple, it carried the weight of love. What made these gatherings deeply meaningful was not how big they were, but how heartfelt. The Duggar family was no longer defined by numbers under one roof. It was defined by connection that survived distance, time, and the natural evolution of life. Their gatherings felt less like orchestrated events and more like gentle returns to a familiar place. As grandchildren grew older, they began creating traditions of their own. They ran through the backyard, climbed onto porch swings, and giggled as grandparents told them stories from years ago. Michelle watched these moments with a mix of joy and nostalgia. The backyard that had once held her own children's laughter now held the laughter of a new generation. The cycle continued, not loudly, but beautifully. There were also quiet family nights moments with just a few children visiting, sitting around the table with homemade soup, catching up on life, sharing updates about work, children, and challenges. These smaller gatherings held their own kind of magic. Without the noise of a full house, conversations became deeper, more honest, more reflective. Michelle and Jim Bob cherished these evenings, the ones where adult children lingered in the kitchen long after the meal was over, simply enjoying being home. Church events brought the family together in different ways. Sometimes they sat side by side in the same row, listening to hymns that once filled their home. Sometimes they gathered outside afterward, catching up between parked cars as grandchildren tugged at their parents' hands. These moments, though simple, felt grounding, a reminder of shared values and shared history. Family reunions, though less frequent now, held a special place in the year. They became a chance to reconnect, to remember, to celebrate the enduring ties that bound them. A chance to stand back and see how far everyone had come. A chance for siblings to talk not as children, but as adults with stories, struggles, and wisdom of their own. These reunions were not perfect. They did not always include everyone, but they were enough more than enough to keep the family rooted. Technology played a surprising role in keeping everyone connected. Video calls bridged the distance between states. Group chats buzzed with photos of new babies, school achievements, recipes, prayer requests, and small updates that once would have been shared around the dinner table. This digital connection became the new version of everyday closeness, less physical, but still real. There were, of course, moments when the absence of certain relatives was felt deeply. Some children lived too far away. Some had commitments that prevented travel. Some were in seasons of life that required privacy or quiet. But even in these absences, the bond remained. Michelle often reminded herself that family does not have to be gathered to be united. They only have to care. They only have to remain connected in the ways they can. And that was enough. The Duggar family's gatherings, holidays, and traditions evolved just as any large families do over time. They became quieter, smaller, more spread out. But they also became richer, filled with layers of memory and meaning. They became moments to pause, to reflect, to appreciate the passage of time. In these new gatherings, whether large or small, the Duggar family found a new way of being together, no longer as children living under one roof, but as adults with homes, challenges, and joys of their own. They came together when they could, and when they did, the love that bound them was unmistakable. What once was a daily experience became a treasured moment. What once was normal became something to look forward to. What once was taken for granted became a blessing. And so, the Duggar family continued to gather not with the same frequency as before, not in the same form, but with the same heart. They continued to celebrate, to reconnect, to share meals, to hold babies, to pray together, to laugh together, and to remember that no matter how far life carried them, they would always be part of something larger, a family with a shared past and a hopeful future. Their story, now quieter and more private, remained as warm as ever. And each gathering, each holiday, each moment of togetherness became another thread in the tapestry of a family that continued to grow, not just in number, but in depth, in love, and in the gentle beauty of time. As the years continued to unfold, and as each of the Duggar children settled into the homes and rhythms they had chosen for themselves, The family entered a season that could only be understood with time, maturity, and reflection. It was a season where life no longer felt like a fast-moving chapter of a television series, but rather a slow, gentle novel, one filled with quiet pages, soft transitions, and moments that carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they were meaningful. In this new season, the future of the Duggar family was no longer shaped by one home or one routine. It was shaped by many homes, many choices, many paths that wove together like threads. Some threads ran parallel, some drifted gently outward, some doubled back during holidays and reunions, but all remained part of the same long tapestry of family, love, and history. The once busy home where everything began became a place of memory rather than motion. It stood quietly, lovingly holding decades of laughter that lingered in corners, echoes of shared prayers, howling giggles of children who had once filled every room, and the warmth of a mother and father who had poured their lives into raising a family. The walls still held those memories, even when the rooms no longer held their voices. Yet something beautiful happened as the children grew into adults. The center of the family shifted. It expanded. It stretched. It became something alive in each home that had branched out. Every daughter carried a piece of the old home into her new one through the recipes she cooked, the way she comforted her children, the songs she hummed during bedtime. Every son carried pieces too through the way he worked, the way he protected his family, the way he built his life with purpose and stability. And slowly, the once single Duggar home became 100 homes in spirit. Grandchildren brought a new spark of life, one that reignited feelings Michelle and Jim Bob thought belonged only to their younger years. Babies were born into a world that looked very different from the one their parents grew up in, quieter, more private, less watched. And in that privacy, new memories were created, ones that were softer and more personal than anything captured on camera in the past. There were moments when Michelle would hold a newborn grandchild and close her eyes, remembering the days when she held her own children in the same way. The curve of a baby's cheek, the softness of tiny hands, the warmth of a sleeping infant resting against her chest. These sensations brought back a flood of memories. But instead of feeling longing for the past, she felt something deeper. Gratitude. Gratitude for having lived through a season so full, and gratitude for living long enough to see a new generation continue the story. Jim Bob found joy in the same way. He would sit with a grandchild on his lap, watching them explore the world with curious eyes, and he would feel a kind of peaceful responsibility. Not the intense responsibility of raising a child, but the gentle responsibility of being present, being supportive, being a stable point in a world that moved faster than the one he had known as a young father. He understood that the legacy he passed down was not about fame or numbers or attention. It was about love shown day by day, year after year. The Duggar children, now parents themselves, often found comfort in sharing their challenges with one another. Group text messages became lifelines, pictures of new babies, updates about sick toddlers, requests for prayer during hard weeks, little victories shared in the middle of ordinary days. Though the family was scattered across different places, the connection remained strong through these small acts of sharing life. And there were phone calls, sometimes short, sometimes long, sometimes made late at night when the house finally grew quiet. Calls where daughters talked about motherhood, about exhaustion, about joy, about the strange and beautiful struggle of trying to do everything their own mother once did. Calls where sons asked for advice on work, home repairs, finances, or simply how to handle the challenges of raising a young family. These conversations created a thread of connection far more meaningful than daily social media posts. As time passed, the Duggar grandchildren grew into toddlers, and toddlers into little children who ran through backyards, learned to ride bicycles, played in church classrooms, and created memories their parents never had to share publicly. These children belonged to a new era of the Duggar story, one defined not by television, but by real life, a quieter life. A life where every special moment didn't need to be captured for the world, only remembered by the heart. There were moments when Jim, Bob, and Michelle would drive to visit one of their children, walking into a home filled with toys, baby blankets, and the sweet scent of a family living in the moment. They would sit with their children, listening to stories about their weeks, helping fold laundry, watching grandchildren play on the floor. Sometimes they stayed for dinner, with meals cooked in kitchens where their daughters now stood as mothers, carrying forward the traditions they once learned at home. These visits were not grand or orchestrated. They were simple, ordinary, sacred in their own quiet way. Moments when grandparents became helpers, encouragers, and observers of a new cycle of life that continued onward with its own rhythm. Though the outside world saw less of the Duggar family, the inner life of the family grew richer. There were private victories children, taking first steps, learning new words, starting school, celebrating small achievements that only parents and grandparents needed to witness. There were quiet challenges, too, moments of exhaustion, times when days felt heavy, seasons when life demanded patience and resilience. But those challenges were softened by the support of a large family that stayed connected in ways that mattered most. The years continued to pass, bringing with them a deeper sense of identity for every member of the family. No longer defined by cameras or public attention, they lived their lives with a kind of freedom that felt new. They made choices based on their own convictions, their own experiences, and their own families. And slowly, the silence that once puzzled the world became a sign of growth, maturity, and peace. This quiet season did not mean the Duggar family was lost. It meant they were living, and living deeply. The Duggar story, which once unfolded in front of millions, transitioned into something far more meaningful, something that belonged to the family alone. The public no longer saw every moment, and that was exactly how it was meant to be. The chapters of their adulthood were written not for entertainment, but for legacy, a legacy of faith, a legacy of love, legacy of family that endures even when unseen. As grandchildren grew and new generations emerged, the future of the Duggar family expanded in directions no one could predict. Some would choose quiet lives. Some would explore new paths. Some would stay close. Some would travel far. But all of them would carry with them the foundation built in the early years, a foundation of resilience, connection, and devotion to family. And in the end, that is what matters most. Not the visibility of a family, not the noise, not the attention, but the love that remains through every season of life. The Duggar family story does not end. It evolves. It softens. It deepens. It continues not on screens, but in homes, in hearts, and in the quiet moments that make a life meaningful. This is the story of a family that grew, changed, and found peace in a world that once watched their every move. A story not of disappearance, but of transformation. Not of silence, but of growth. Not of endings, but of new beginnings. Their story goes on. Quietly, beautifully, and exactly the way real life is meant to unfold.